Look who's in Havana, France's president, trumping the field and becoming the first European leader to visit the island since Spain's Felipe González way back in 1986. Francois Hollande getting in ahead of his neighbors and ahead of the Americans, who recently embarked on a historic thaw at the Castro regime that was half a century in the making. We'll see how fast events are changing in the land of the Castros, what place for the French once the U.S. genuinely moves in, and what's at stake for a wider Caribbean region where, yes, the U.S. looms large, but France too has interests in overseas dependencies like Guadeloupe, Hollande's previous stop, and former colonies like his next destination, Haiti, where the past weighs on the present much as it does in Cuba. Today in the France 24 debate, Hollande in Havana. And with us to talk about it in the show, Axel Guiden, co-author of The Double Life of Fidel Castro, which comes out in the US and UK
tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also with us, Christophe Venturin. He collaborates with the left-leaning journal Mémoires de lutte, Memories of Struggles, I suppose is how you would
translate. Should be like that in English. But...
Yeah. And you are the author in French of The Awakening of a Continent, that continent being Latin America. He is a former UMP candidate who for the post to represent the French abroad in Parliament for the Caribbean region. Pascal Drouot, businessman as well, and analyst. Thank you for being with us. And Frédéric Martel, fresh back from Cuba. Nice to see you again, Frédéric. Frédéric also with Smart. Tell us what Smart is.
It's a book about the internet, and I made a chapter on Cuba, which is basically a country without or with, depending on how you look at it, internet.
All right, the internet, of course, one of the things that's...
It's a key point for the future.
On the cusp of all that change, we'll be talking about it. And the France 24 debate, speaking of internet, where you can join us on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. But before we talk about the internet, let's talk about Francois Hollande. Last week, it was a summit of Gulf leaders where he was the guest of honor. Today, Cuba, the French president popping up where you'd more likely perhaps expect Barack Obama. But when he landed in Havana, the French president, careful to state that he was in no way muscling in on Washington's once and perhaps future turf.
There is a respect for independence, for the aspirations before the transformations in the world. And today, this carries a special significance after what President Barack Obama has finally decided. France, along with Europe, will accompany this process.
Frédéric Martel, the French president, of course, saying this trip was planned a while back, that it has nothing to do with the thaw that's going on. Your thoughts on that?
I don't believe that, but who knows?
You don't believe that? Why?
I think it's a reaction, in a way or in another, to the American evolution. The word evolution is pretty the right one, I think, for Barack Obama. He's always on evolution on some things, on gay marriage, on Iran, on things like that. And I think in Cuba, Francois Hollande tries to do things, but he doesn't know exactly what to do. I think it's a very messy policy. I agree with him that he can go to Cuba. I think it's great. But at the same time, I don't know what he really expects, what he want to do. So I'm kind of waiting to understand.
All right, waiting to understand. Well, perhaps this will help us understand. Pascal Drouot, among those executives that are with the French president, Air France, Accor, Pernod Ricard, major corporations. In fact, one analyst was saying that this trip was planned by the French Business Leaders Association, not by the presidency.
Well, not only. I think that this trip was politically very important for France to be present in the Caribbean region, definitely. And for sure, it was an opportunity in the new international context to to say that France will participate to the change in the international new context. I mean, Venezuela has many problems, is a first partner of Cuba, and so Cuba had to move to 2 years ago, last year, and Cuba is moving. And for France, after the presence of the president of Russia in 2014, last year, of Xi Jinping, the president of China, it was important for France also to be present in Cuba.
But why the French and not, for instance, the Spanish, the former colonial power, number one trading partner in Europe for Cuba?
As you said, Spain was present through the former president of the government 20 years ago. For France, well, France is from the Caribbean. France is member of the Caribbean region, and it is a normal process for France to be linked with Cuba. Remember that in 1210, France with Cuba began a new process of bilateral cooperation, re-began in 2010 with former President Sarkozy. And so the visit of Francois Hollande today is concluded, as he said, a process, opening a new process with a new international context for Cuba.
All right, so continuity on that point. French tabloid Libération makes this visit its cover story this Monday. We could show you that cover. It reads on it the headline, Reunion Island, up there you see. And there you see a Francois Hollande dressed up as Che Guevara. Reunion Island, by the way, a play on words, because réunion in French also means meeting, as in business meeting. In fact, on page 3, the story reads, Hollande, seller of dreams, dreams of selling. That's the headline for that story. What's your reaction, Christophe Ventura, when you see Francois Hollande dressed up as Che Guevara?
Well, I think it's a journalistic
Cover.
Creation. So it's just that it's a point of view. No, I think what is important to understand is that, as you say, France is a Caribbean country, and today the Caribbean region is becoming a very high strategic and geo-economical high priority for all the main countries of the world, and France wants to deal with that. That's the orientation of this travel, and I would say that France, like the US, are running after Cuba, because Cuba is one of the key to open the Caribbean region, but beyond that, to open Latin America through Asia, and that's what is behind our story. The US, as they have understood that China was growing and that they have to reload it completely their strategy because it failed. That's the only story. It's just for concrete interest that they did that. And France is trying to follow when Mr. Obama gave the green light, if I can say, to its partners. He said, you can go, we are now able to open and to have a new diplomacy with Cuba. So France is coming for that. And so we have to understand that the Caribbean region is becoming one of the main hub for trade, financial markets, finance, etc. And what is at stake is the concurrence which is building behind that between competition between China and the US. And the French want to be part of this new game because that's a new area.
Want to be part of it. A reaction, by the way, to that front page on Twitter. Richard saying, Hollande isn't a very convincing Guevara. His face will never adorn any T-shirts or students' walls. But Francois Hollande's a socialist, right?
I would say that socialist is a point of discussion. I would say that Hollande is not Che Guevara. It's a joke. This cover is just a joke, but it's not what is at stake for the discussion with Cuba. As I told you, Cuba is dealing already a lot with Russia, with China, with Brazil in the region, and that's the Occidental countries who are running after the country today to have a space in this new reconfiguration of the geopolitics.
Axel Gill?
Well, I would say it's a bit of an exaggeration to say that Cuba is the key for the opening on the Asian market, but it's true that Cuba is a key player in the region, the most important player actually in the region. The good thing for France, who is primarily coming for business, not for doing politics. I mean, the relationship with France and Cuba is good and has always been, except for the first 3 years when Cuba was actually helping arming and training the Algerian rebels against the French colonial power. And this took an end in 1962. Since then, you know, from De Gaulle to Pompidou to Mitterrand, I mean, Mitterrand received Fidel Castro in Paris, 95. And now it's a very good, I think the big win here is not for the French. I mean, for the French, it's big news. Francois Hollande tries to present this as a big event for the whole world. Actually, it's a big event for France. It's a win for situation for Cuba that is able to present itself besides with the partner of the country so-called or called le pays des droits de l'homme, the country of the human rights, which is actually not the country of the human rights, but the country of the Declaration of the Human Rights. And Cuba is calling the shots here. They say, okay, come, we can do a lot of business together, but the number one point is we won't discuss the human rights issue. And so did they tell the Americans. I mean, when Obama and Raúl made a deal, I mean, Cuba is the winner, obviously. I mean, they got rid of these five spies. They got their country barred from the list of the countries supporting terrorism, and then now we'll have probably in a few months or years the end of the embargo. So for France, Cuba is key, and I agree on this point. Cuba is key to open the Latin American market. I mean, which is already open because the influence of Cuba in Latin America is gigantic. And in the rest of the world, it's also very important, but primarily in Latin America.
All right, let's pick up on one of your points you made, which is that Francois Hollande is there to do business. In fact, one viewer, Mick, on Twitter, saying, getting in before most to promote French business. He's good on international stage, talking about Hollande. Not so at home. The French president, Frédéric Martel, he's sitting down with Cuba's Roman Catholic cardinal, Jaime Ortega, but he's not meeting with dissidents.
First of all, I would like to react to what has been said on the business. I mean, I was in Cuba this week. I was also in Cuba 2 other times this year. I mean, you cannot do business right now with Cuba. It's extremely difficult in many aspects. So you can expect that something will change. But for now, you don't have rule of law. You don't have economics reality. You cannot employ people. It's all state. The country is in extremely bad shape. It's a total mess. The only thing that works is the police, the great police. I had a lot of problems this week with them. And actually, for now, it's just even the tourist industry is not at all in the level to be able to get much more tourists.
So Francois Hollande,
I think
not sitting down with dissidents, that's just realpolitik.
But, I mean, it's also wishful thinking. We'll see what will happen. But what is the scenario of the next 10 years in Cuba? Who knows? Nobody knows. It can be the same. It can be. I mean, there is several scenarios, but for now we don't. We are not sure.
Very clear.
As for
If you know what will happen.
I mean, as for business, I mean, what you're just saying, and I agree on this with this point. But I mean, precisely. That makes, I mean, if nothing is working and they need infrastructure, I mean, that gives a huge potential for many companies. So that's point number one. Point number two, it's not correct to say that you cannot do business. You can do business with your partner, the Cuban partner, who is the military.
You cannot hire somebody.
No.
You don't have.
No, you're right. If you compare to the classical neoliberalism, capitalism, you're right. It's not like that in Cuba. But I mean, there is a new law from
yes. But if you want to do market, it's not a communist market, right?
A foreign investment, for example.
You cannot have investment.
Joint venture system.
Yes, but
this is not. This is not capitalism. Yes, you have that.
This is not business.
This is
Cuba,
capitalism that will be run, and that is already run, actually, by the generals from the corporation called GAESA, which runs 80% of the business and the economy in that island. So you will be able, France will be able, and the other countries as well, to do a sort of capitalism that they are actually already implementing for a small beneficial to a small minority of the top leadership, which is doing business and which is very well trained for this. The problem is, I mean, who is going to benefit from this apart from the top elite. That's
That's
one
the
very
second
important.
point. But to answer your question on the, I mean, it's another subject, but it's true that in the visit, you have Hollande that's going to see the Cardinal Jaime Ortega, who is not an opponent. I mean, he has been a long time ago, but now he's totally in the system. And he's going to give a prize or something to discuss at least with one of the sons of Che Guevara, which is not, I mean, Che Guevara, and especially the son, it's also an apparatchik, it's also the system. It's also actually the origin of the dictatorship is with Che Guevara, whatever you think about Che Guevara.
So is Hollande right to go then?
I mean, I still believe that you should go. I think the strategy of Obama, and in a way follow with the follower that is Hollande, is probably a good strategy. All the other strategy had failed in the last 50 years. So you have to try something new, but don't expect to speak about human rights, and of course, don't expect to change the system for the freedom of press or freedom of expression for now.
But you know, Obama clearly understood that the only strategy for the US to break its own isolation in Latin America was to change its relationship
But there is
with
not
Cuba.
an isolation of America,
In Cuba,
of the US
yes.
in Latin America.
Okay.
Pascal
In Cuba,
Bourg.
something has moved, definitely. And for
We
sure,
don't-
for France, I think that something has moved.
It's an
I see it,
hypothesis.
yes, well, I think it is a reality. Something has moved on economy, and for France, it is a fantastic opportunity. As you know, Cuba is not member of the IFES. So for sure, and you're right, to find credits, international financement, you have to find partners. Cuba don't want to live again the suffering of the 90s when the USSR fell down. And for sure, they opened to new partnership. And as they are not member of the IFES, Paris is leading the Club of Paris. The Club of Paris is the club of the partnership of the new partner of Cuba on finance. And the debt of Cuba
These are, in other words,
inside-
private lenders.
with the countries as Brazil, France, who are partners of Cuba on finance. And inside the Club of Paris, the debt of Cuba with France represent 30% of the total debt of the Club of Paris. It does mean that France has there, with the Club of Paris, the mean to have a weight in the new
It has leverage, is what you're saying.
reality.
We're going to pick up on those points when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.